The king of rock and roll wasn't always the devoted husband you might think. Imagine a night when Elvis wished Priscilla would just leave him alone, but what he said next will truly surprise you. Their love story, once the envy of millions, grew increasingly complicated as fame, temptation, and misunderstandings took their toll. Flashback to the 1970s, Elvis was at the peak of his career, captivating audiences in Las Vegas with his iconic performances. But behind the glitz and glamour, his marriage to Priscilla was unraveling. The long residencies in Vegas meant weeks apart, leaving Priscilla lonely and desperate for his attention, while Elvis seemed more interested in the freedom that fame provided. Number 4, Elvis's growing distance. Elvis Presley was always on the move, with Las Vegas being the epicenter of his career in the 1970s. The king had a demanding schedule, often spending weeks, even months, away from home, performing to adoring crowds night after night. While he thrived in the spotlight, these long stretches on the road took a heavy toll on his relationship with Priscilla. He loved the thrill of performing and cherished the time with his entourage, who gave him the camaraderie he craved. The freedom to indulge his desires, including flings with groupies, seemed irresistible, but it also came at the expense of his marriage, pushing Priscilla further away. Back home, Priscilla was left in a lonely limbo. The glamorous life of being Mrs. Presley was a gilded cage, and as the weeks turned into months, the excitement began to fade into emptiness. Priscilla tried time and again to bridge the emotional distance that had grown between them. She pleaded with Elvis to spend more time with her and their daughter, Lisa Marie. Despite her efforts, her requests often fell on deaf ears. Elvis was consumed by the demands of his career and the intoxicating allure of the nightlife. Priscilla found herself competing not only with his career, but also with the endless parade of admirers, a battle she knew she couldn't win. Priscilla's loneliness deepened as she realized that Elvis's heart seemed to belong more to the stage and his lifestyle than to her. She wanted a family, a stable home, and someone who would be there at the end of the day, not just a legendary star who popped in and out between tours. Her frustration grew as she tried to hold together a crumbling marriage while raising their young daughter almost entirely on her own. Priscilla's growing desperation for connection was met with Elvis's indifference, leaving her feeling trapped in a life where her love was unreciprocated and her pleas for a normal family life were ignored. Number 3, the tipping point. Elvis's frustration with Priscilla's pleas for more time was palpable, and it soon turned into a dismissive coldness. To Elvis, his career was all-consuming, and any demand for more family time felt like an unwelcome distraction from the life he had worked so hard to build. Whenever Priscilla begged for more of his attention, it seemed to push him further away. At one point, in a moment of exasperation, Elvis even confided in his bodyguard Red West, saying, "I wish she would find someone else to mess around with and stop bugging me." It was a flippant remark, born out of his irritation and perhaps a sense of helplessness. Elvis simply didn't know how to handle the responsibilities of a traditional family life amid the whirlwind of his fame. But Elvis's words had unintended consequences, and the irony soon hit harder than he ever anticipated. Priscilla, feeling neglected and unfulfilled, eventually found someone else. Mike Stone, a karate instructor who provided her with the attention and emotional connection she craved. When Elvis found out about her affair, he was furious and deeply hurt. Red West, always the blunt one, reminded Elvis of his own words when he confronted him about it. "Hell, man, ain't that what you wanted?" Red asked, making Elvis face the reality of his reckless words. It was a moment of bitter irony, as Elvis suddenly realized that he had been wrong. He didn't truly want Priscilla to leave him, and the sting of her finding comfort in another man cut deeper than he expected. Elvis's regret became painfully evident. When confronted by Red, his response was telling, "Not that way, man. Not that way." In that moment, the true depth of Elvis's feelings for Priscilla came to light. Despite his dismissive words, he hadn't genuinely wanted her to be unfaithful or to find happiness in another man's arms. It was one thing to say it out of frustration, but the reality of losing her was a harsh wake-up call. Elvis wanted to be the center of Priscilla's world, yet he wasn't willing or able to give her the same in return. His regret was a stark reminder of the fragility of their relationship, of how carelessly spoken words could shatter something he valued, even if he didn't always show it. Number 2, Priscilla's affair. Priscilla's growing isolation eventually led her into the arms of Mike Stone, a charismatic karate instructor. Mike was everything Elvis wasn't during those strained times: attentive, available, and able to provide the emotional support that Priscilla so desperately needed. Their connection started innocently, but soon grew into something deeper, filling the void left by Elvis's constant absence. As Priscilla sought solace in Mike, it didn't take long for the people around Elvis to notice. Elvis's entourage, his closest friends and confidants, were already aware of Priscilla's affair long before Elvis caught on. They had seen the way she would disappear for hours, sometimes days, and the whispered rumors from staff around Graceland had started to build into a steady murmur that was impossible to ignore. Sonny West, one of Elvis's most trusted bodyguards, had a front-row seat to the unfolding drama. He even tried to help Priscilla once when Elvis was searching for her. He recalled a day when the warning light at the gate of Elvis's Monovale Road home went off, signaling someone had arrived. Sonny, suspecting it might be Priscilla, rushed out to intercept her, hoping to prepare her for Elvis's questions. When he poked his head into her car, he urgently told her that Elvis had been trying to find her, and they had called everywhere, even Chuck Norris's place, to no avail. Priscilla remained silent, but the tension in her eyes spoke volumes. Sonny felt torn. He didn't want to betray Elvis, but he also sympathized with Priscilla's predicament, knowing Elvis's erratic behavior had driven her away. The more time Priscilla spent with Mike, the more obvious her absences became, and soon even the least observant members of Elvis's entourage began to notice something was off. Priscilla's demeanor changed. She was no longer the dutiful, doting wife waiting in the wings. Her evasiveness and the way she slipped in and out of their lives without much explanation only fueled suspicions. The whispers grew louder, and eventually, it was impossible for Elvis to ignore what was happening around him. The once tightly controlled bubble of Graceland was cracking, and Elvis was the last to fully understand why. Priscilla's actions were a desperate attempt to reclaim her independence and find happiness outside of Elvis's tumultuous world, but for Elvis, it was an unexpected betrayal that he simply wasn't prepared to face. Number 1. Elvis's reaction. The sting of betrayal hit Elvis harder than he ever could have anticipated. When he found out about Priscilla's affair with Mike Stone, it was as though the world had shifted beneath him. Elvis, who had always prided himself on being in control, suddenly felt vulnerable and powerless. He was furious. How could she, his Priscilla, turn to someone else? The irony was impossible to ignore. Elvis had been unfaithful throughout their relationship, often seeing other women without any thought to the consequences. He had indulged in his freedom without considering Priscilla's feelings, assuming she would always be there waiting for him. But now, the tables had turned, and the realization that he was not the center of her world anymore was a bitter pill to swallow. Elvis's anger wasn't just about Priscilla's betrayal, it was the shock of facing the repercussions of his own behavior, something he never thought would catch up with him. From Priscilla's perspective, the affair wasn't about revenge or trying to hurt Elvis. It was about finding a piece of herself that had been lost in the shadow of his stardom. In a later interview, Priscilla opened up about why she felt she had to leave. "I just didn't want to share him," she said, reflecting on the painful reality of being married to one of the most famous men in the world. She had tried to be understanding, to turn a blind eye to Elvis's infidelities, but the constant rumors, the endless parade of women, and the feeling of being second to the lifestyle he loved eventually wore her down. She needed more attention, more love, more stability, things Elvis couldn't or wouldn't give her. Priscilla had been willing to put up with a lot, but the realization that she would always have to share him was something she could no longer accept. Her decision to find love elsewhere was driven by the deep emotional void that Elvis had left. Despite the luxury and glamour that came with being Mrs. Presley, the loneliness was unbearable. Priscilla had spent years trying to make their marriage work, hoping that one day Elvis would change, that he would finally see her as his true partner and equal. But the truth was, Elvis was married to his career, to his fans, and to the legend he had built around himself. Priscilla's choice to be with Mike Stone was her way of reclaiming her sense of worth and seeking the kind of love and loyalty she had always dreamed of. It was a painful decision, but one that ultimately allowed her to step out of the shadows and live for herself. For Elvis, it was a devastating blow, but for Priscilla, it was the beginning of finding her own identity, beyond just being the wife of the king. Elvis and Priscilla's marriage was a symbol of both the intoxicating allure and the heavy burden of fame, a testament to the immense pressure that comes with being in the public eye. The challenges of commitment were magnified under the spotlight, as Elvis's career demands and the lifestyle that accompanied it ultimately overwhelmed their ability to maintain a stable relationship. Their divorce in 1973 was not just the end of a marriage. It was a turning point that marked the beginning of separate lives, with each of them seeking fulfillment in their own way. Even the king of rock and roll couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. Was it love, fame, or simply human flaws that tore them apart? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Elvis was too harsh on Priscilla, or was it all part of their rock and roll lifestyle? If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more untold tales about Elvis and other music legends.